Thank you everybody for joining us today. And we have Michael today. So this session is recorded, and then we do circulate the recording with community as well. But I'm very happy to have Michael here, and he's going to have a very interesting conversation about product market fit and what it is, and how do you know you have reached it, and then connect it to how helpful and critically important is it to have it when at any stage of the game, founders are raising the fund, and that strategy could make the job of the investors a lot easier to understand where their head is and which direction they're going, and also from so it kind of serves both communities, both founders and investors, for founders to know and understand how to implement this and how helpful it is, and from the investor perspective, what to look for. And if a company doesn't have a kind of really helpful or reasonable or realistic product market fit expectations or goals, then maybe you need to pause and spend a little bit more time on that. So with that said, Michael, stage is yours.
Amazing. Thanks, Sarah. Chris, thanks for having me, and looking forward to this. So as Sarah mentioned, we're going to talk about what does product market fit actually look like? And more specifically, when do you know that you have product market fit? As Sarah mentioned, we also want to connect the concept of product market fit to fundraising. Sort of how does it relate to your seed round and your Series A round? And why is it a building block for your Series B and beyond? Because if we can understand what this building blocks looks like, it's something that we can optimize and we can just keep repeating over and over and over and over again. One thing to point out is it's not company market fit, but it's product market fit. So over the life cycle of your company, you're going to have lots of products and lots of different markets that you're going to go after. And so this is why it's a crucial building block. Now, if anybody's familiar with Zig Ziglar, one of my favorite quotes is, "You can't hit a target you cannot see, and you cannot see a target that you do not have." Unfortunately, when I was out running my company, no one ever showed me how to actually define product market fit. It usually was something along the lines of, you know it when you'll have it, and you definitely know when you don't have it.
Okay, Michael, sorry to stop you. I committed the cardinal sin of skipping your introduction and your background. Do you mind just giving us, actually, it's very relevant for people to know your experience in that field. Do you mind to just share with us?
Absolutely. I'm actually going to get to that in a couple of slides.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So again, no one showed me how to define product market fit. Being an engineer, my view was if we can actually define product market fit, especially for our unique company and our unique situation, we will be then able to reverse engineer our way from what product market fit looks like to where we are now, and then use that as a blueprint to run our company. So let's first start with a high level definition of what does product market fit look like. So in general, I find product market fit has a lot of different definitions that sort of run around. And the concept, is it product market fit or is it go to market fit? Are they separate things? Sort of my definition of product market fit really sits around, it means that you're ready to scale. Usually when a founder thinks of pre-product market fit, it means cash conservation, experimentation, still trying to figure things out. Usually the delineation of when you think you have product market fit, you start spending like a drunken sailor. You start ramping up, you start scaling, you start hiring, possibly raising a lot more money. And we need to be very clear, if we are going to start spending money, that we have something that works and is ready to scale. One of the definitions of venture scale that I think is probably pretty universal if you talk to everybody, especially in the venture community, is basically once you get to $1 million in revenue, you want to get to $100 million in revenue in about 7 to 10 years. You may or may not have heard of the definition before of triple, triple, double, 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 which basically means once you hit $1 million in revenue, you want to triple revenue the next year, triple the revenue after that, and then double, 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 which takes you basically to $100 million a year in revenue. in 7 years. What that does is by the time you're hitting $100 million in revenue, you're starting to slow down your growth and starting to basically meet or exceed sort of the public market growth expectations. Prior to that, you're blowing them out of the water because you're in hyperscale mode and you're still relatively small in comparison to sort of how do you grow at a significant rate at $100 million plus. Where we're going to focus on, obviously, is in those first couple of years. You hit $1 million, you want to get to triple, so 3 million, and then 9 million within 24 months. That is a huge feat, and that's basically the venture scale curve that we're looking for. Now, 7 years is a benchmark, but it turns out a lot of companies are actually going faster than this. So venture expectations are that you get there in 7 years, but we're all looking for how do you get there faster than 7 years? How do we scale as fast as we possibly can? Now, the point of venture scale doesn't mean from day one you need to scale. Lots of companies go through these periods where they make no money, right? So Figma is a great example. Exit for, I think it was $20 billion. The first 5 years of their existence, they made $0 in revenue. They were able to raise money throughout this process as well. 3 years of R&D, 1 year of private beta, 1 year of a public launch. But the expectation was once they started making money, they would hit venture scale. From 2017 to 2021, in 5 years' time, they went from making their first, I think, $700,000 in 2017 to $210 million in 2021. So they were clearly faster than the venture scale, the sort of general definition of the venture scale path. Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, just a quick question, Michael. Do you remember when Figma raised their funding, like seed, and Series A?
Yeah, I believe their Series A was in this 2014 timeframe. I don't know exactly when their seed round was, but I believe it was in the early days as well.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. I thought this quote was really good from Carolina of VC on Twitter. In her opinion, venture growth rates are far more important than the revenue itself. There's so much out there that says like when you hit $1 million or $3 million in ARR, you're automatically Series A ready, but that's just a revenue number. It's the growth rates that investors are looking for. So said differently, I'd rather invest in a company at $500,000 in ARR growing consistently. So consistently is a key word there, 20 to 30% month over month than a company with $1 million in ARR growing only at 5 to 10% month over month. Right now, realistically, 5 to 10% month over month still puts you on this venture scale curve. But I think the point here was important. It's that it's not the total revenue numbers that matter. It's the growth rate that matters the most. Now, one of the things, though, that in the last couple of years has sort of tainted the concept, I think, of venture capital and venture scale is this concept of growth at all cost. So Sequoia basically went on record, I think it was a couple of years ago, that growth at all costs is no longer being rewarded. And this is talked a lot about nowadays in the venture community, or at least with founders. And I think there's a misconception around this. Growth at all cost no longer being rewarded doesn't mean profitable and no growth. What it means is investors are now looking for capital efficient growth. VC firms' economics have not changed. They still want you to hit the venture scale path. They still want to see you get to $100 million in ARR or more, which means that you have to grow at it still at the same incredible rate. That's the whole point of being sort of in a venture-backed startup. What's been focused on more, though, is the capital efficient part of growth. You can't just buy growth and spend a lot of money to do it. We want to do it in a capital efficient way these days. So we're going to talk about that in a couple of ways over today's call. First, we're going to talk about the missing go-to-market slide. So whenever I look at a pitch deck, there's always two go-to-market slides, but there's always missing one slide that really crystallizes product market fit, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to use the story of how Uber went from $0 to $10 billion in 10 years, and we're going to see when they raised their Series A, What was the narrative and the story that they were telling at that point in time? And how does that play into our version of product market fit? Now, interesting enough, Uber is not obviously the most capital efficient growth company out there. They're now profitable, but we're going to look at sort of two parts of Uber's story. What went well in terms of the capital efficient part, and what didn't go well in terms of the capital efficient part. There's two parts to capital efficiency, and we almost always focus on the first one being sort of the unit economics, which obviously Uber spent a lot of money to get to their profitability. And we're going to talk about the other part, what they did really well and what a lot of other companies did. Now, obviously, Uber is just an example, and your business is probably different. You're in a different market, a different business model, different growth tactics. There's probably lots and lots of things that are different about your business. So what we want to make sure we talk about is how do we take this story from Uber, and then how do we translate that into your company so that you can create your own version of what product market fit looks like? And then what are the signals that we need to look for to see how are we doing on our journey towards product market fit? Now, obviously, I can't talk about everything today, but at the end, I want to talk about how this story also laid the groundwork. Whenever I work with a company, this story is where we start, is what does product market fit look like? Where are we? What will venture scale look like? And it's the story that we used with Ignacio to get him to 7 lead term sheets from VCs. And I'll talk a little bit about that process as well. So let's jump in. As Sarah mentioned, I'll do a little brief introduction about sort of who I am and sort of why I've come to sort of talk about that. I started my career at Nortel Networks as a developer, writing code for their Japanese line card. Then I transitioned into sale for a pre-revenue startup. They had just raised $17 million. I was there very early on their sales team. And then I left when we were doing about $100 million in revenue, and we'd gone public. We had just recently gone public. This is around 2008, so the Great Recession is when I started my company, and then I went and raised money. We raised about $8 million over a couple of rounds. All of my experience raising money was in and around the markets we're just going into right now. Sort of down markets, venture capitalists are tightening their purse strings. So I'm very familiar with this world of fundraising. In 2014, we sold that company to one of our partners. And then in 2017, where I was CTO of that company and running product. In 2017, we sold that company to the 4th largest cable company in the US doing addressable advertising. And that's when I switched over to become a VC. I spent 5 years roughly as a venture investor at a seed stage venture fund here in Toronto. They were one of my first institutional investors. And now I coach companies on how to fundraise, how to actually build out their story, run their process, and get ready for fundraising. On my year off, sort of between selling my company and becoming a VC, I kind of thought to myself, if I'm going to study something, I probably should something that's relatively universal. So I started looking into productivity. And in one of the courses I took, I came across this quote, which really stuck out to me, that the secret to success is quite simple. It's do less, do it more often, and keep getting better at it. And for some reason, this really resonated with me, because most of the times where I go wrong in my life is because I do the exact opposite to this. I try to do more, which means I don't do it as often, which means I just don't get better at it. And then I spin my tires and I wonder why things are going wrong. Well, when I reflected on that, it turns out that this actually just set the pattern for what I turned into my framework called priority mapping of what does product market fit look like and how do you scale companies? It's quite simple. First, your job as a founder is to find something that works. Once you have something that works, you then want to do it more often and keep getting better at it. And once you've done that, you want to keep finding more things that work and just rinsing and repeating this process over and over and over again. It also happened to line up perfectly with the venture stages. Your seed stage is all about finding your thing that works. What's that first thing that works? Your Series A is about taking that thing that works and scaling it, doing it more often, keep getting better at it. Your Series B is about scaling your thing that works, but also start laying the groundwork for your next thing that's going to work. How do you start diversifying your process? Okay, let's talk about this as it relates to Uber, but also what it looks like in an enterprise sales play, a B2B SaaS company, a consumer play, a marketplace, and a moonshot or a deep tech play. So let's start with the missing go-to-market slide. Most go-to-market strategies or most pitch decks include these two slides when they talk about their go-to-market strategy: how we make money and how we're going to grow. Both are very, very important slides. How we make money is usually done in one of two ways or have both of these components. First component is, sorry, just someone's mute. Nope, I don't know where that's coming from. Okay, how we make money is usually done in two ways. First is, here's how our pricing model works. So we charge by on $1 per kilometer. We have this thing called surge pricing, whatever your pricing model details look like. It's a foundational element, super important and required. The second way you talk about how you make money are the tactics that you're going to use. What are the go-to-market motions? We're going to use network effects. We're going to use word of mouth, BDRs, SDRs, content marketing, paid ads. There's probably some set of tactics that you're using to grow. And then we jump to this slide, usually. And this is the problem. Is then we say, okay, that's how we make money. And we make money right now with Uber Black, but then we're going to grow by doing Uber X, Uber Pool, and Uber Eats. And while that's great, all we hear as an investor is we're going to grow by doing something different again, and something different again. And different just means slow, untested, and expensive. Typically, it's not a guarantee that just because you have one thing that works, the next things that you do are also going to work. We've seen lots of products by lots of very big companies who it didn't work the way they expected to, and they either had to shut them down or they lost a lot of money or whatever the case may be. So just because you have one thing that works doesn't mean the next thing's going to work. And this is generally where companies and startups fall off the venture scale path. One of the challenges for a lot of seed stage founders is your vision includes a lot of things. And at your seed stage or at your Series A, when you're finally given a lot of money, $5, $10, $20 million, you think, I now have enough resources to go and tackle my entire vision. And what happens is you start spreading yourself thin. So what's the one missing slide? Well, whenever we include it in the deck, sort of both VCs and founders generally will say, this is the most important slide in our deck. It's because once you get a VC excited about your story, this is the slide that you are going to talk the most about in terms of diligence, in terms of talking about the signals that you have, in terms of showing your data room or your diligence or any of the diligence that they're going to do. How you're going to educate an investor will all be around this one slide. So we're going to look about when Uber raised their Series A, which is at 2011, and how this slide comes into play. So if we rewind a little bit, if you looked at Uber's pre-seed deck, they were called Uber Cab at the time. Their first, in that deck, they talked about going after a multi-billion-dollar market. So most founders, this is what they will do, is they're going to present a multi-billion-dollar market. In this case, it was a $4.2 billion market and growing. So arguably a small market by today's standards, but still a very large market. Now, Uber, like all of us, had limited resources when they first started. It's hard to imagine now, but right when they started in the early days, they had limited resources like most startups. So they've got a huge market of limited resources. Where did they start? I'm sure most of you already know this, but in 2009, they started with Uber Black in San Francisco. They raised about $200,000. Founders put in their own money. They had a small team, and they started with Uber Black in San Francisco. Now, here's an interesting question. What do you think the total addressable market of Uber Black in San Francisco was? Their total market was a $4.2 billion market, but Uber Black in San Francisco, I'd wager a bet that it was less than $40 million in a total addressable market. So a tiny sliver of their total addressable market, but that's okay because they only had limited resources. It took about a year. They got a $1.3 million seed round, and they basically got Uber Black in San Francisco to $1 million in net revenue to the company, minus all the driver's fees. And arguably, they had a blueprint that worked in San Francisco. Now, this is where things get interesting. They took that and they said, we have a blueprint. It's making money in San Francisco. And they used that as the basis for their story to raise an $11 million Series A. Still, by today's standard, a relatively normal amount of money to raise at your Series A. Now, what did they do with that money? Did they grow by doing something similar, or did they grow by doing something different? It's kind of a trick question, but they took Uber Black in San Francisco and went copy, paste, 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 paste. They took it from San Francisco to New York to Seattle to Chicago and eventually to every other major city. They went from $1 million to $5 million in less than 12 months. You can't do this by experimenting, or at least if you do it by experimenting, it's because you got lucky, right? We can't engineer that. What we can do is we can shift out of experimentation mode and into execution mode. Now, taking it from San Francisco to New York to Seattle to Chicago and to city hop this is no small feat. That is an incredible operational nightmare right there, and takes a lot of discipline when you have a much grander vision beyond Uber Black. And this is where it gets interesting. Because they were able to scale so fast, they were able to attract their Series B investment in less than 12 months. There's nowhere that says that you have to raise your round every 18 to 24 months or 36 months. You can go faster if you're able to show traction and show that you have product market fit. Now they've raised a $37 million Series B. They're doing $5 million in revenue with $37 million in the bank of fresh capital. Now they have a massive team in comparison to while they were at Series A. Now they have resources to take 10, 20% of that and start experimenting on something different. So they took their expansion strategy with Uber Black, and by 2012, Uber Black was doing roughly $15 million in revenue, and they started repeating this process over again. Find something new that works with UberX, and then once it works, keep doing it more often, scale it to more cities as well. 2013, they raised a $363 million Series A. Uber Black and UberX are scaling up. More money's going to UberX now. It's just a bigger market. And they went from $15 million to $105 million in a single year. More than 5x revenue again the following year to $500 million. Still Uber Black, UberX, and now they're launching Uber Pool. They just keep diversifying themselves as they get more capital, but they don't take their eye off the ball and keep scaling up what they already have that works. Again, triple revenue again. So they're well past the venture scale equation or chart right now. And by 2015, they launched Uber Eats. One of the reasons why you want to diversify is during COVID, Uber Black, UberX, and Uber Pool were basically decimated. Uber Eats is what gave them a saving grace during COVID because it diversified their business model. And not necessarily always going to be a black swan event, but you can see the power of diversification as you are going up. So it is important to keep repeating this process over and over and over again. So they get to 1.5 billion. And then from 2016 to 2018, they ride these four horses from 3 billion to 7 billion to 10 billion. So that's $0 to $10 billion in 10 years. And it all starts with this. First step is to find something that works, and then to keep doing it more often, and then rinsing and repeating this process over and over and over again. So if you're interested and want to raise money, it's very important to have the right go-to-market strategy, to be able to talk about what your thing that works is going to look like, what product market fit will look like. So once you have that thing that works, how are you going to scale it in a capital efficient way by doing something similar without changing very much in your story? And then after that, how are you going to keep finding more things that work all the way to your larger, grander vision that you have for this? So number 2, let's now talk about how to make it work for you. So Uber obviously focused on cities. I like using Uber as an example because I find cities are very easy for people to wrap their heads around, right? It's very easy to visualize and to see how it's better to go from Uber Black in San Francisco to New York than launching Uber X. Unfortunately, though, city hopping is not the only strategy. And so this is where most people go, okay, that's great. I can see how Uber does this, but geography is just not how I would split up my market. And that's okay because it's not the only way to tackle this kind of market. So Sandvine, the company that I worked for, this is the startup that I worked for that went to $100 million. We started with, or we scaled based on going after who the customers were. So we built an internet router, an intelligent router that we sold to internet service providers, more specifically cable companies. And we started with single box deployments. So this was one rack, one data center, enough bandwidth that we could solve it with one single box. We did that until we were making millions of dollars, figuring out what our sales process looked like, what the value proposition of our product was, figured out basically how our whole company worked. And then we started figuring out what does multiple box deployments look like, multiple sites, what does Time Warner, what does Comcast, how do we scale this to ever bigger customers and to all the different customers that we could sell this to. What didn't change is we didn't have to build a new product. We didn't have to change our sales process. All we were changing was our deployment model and the prospects that we were going after. HubSpot did this based on what the problem the customers were solving. So their initial software, which was a CRM, didn't change. What they did is they changed the front door that customers would come into. So inventing inbound marketing, they first started blogging about SMB strategy, then internet marketing, then SEO, then blogging, then advertising. The tactics they used and the product they sold didn't change. All that changed was the implementation of those tactics. So this is how they were able to go copy, paste, paste, paste. If you actually go back in the way back time machine, you can look at how HubSpot's blog actually unfolded. So they had 40 SMB strategy articles, then they had about 30 internet marketing articles, and then it sort of waterfalled off of there. And you could watch it actually unfold year by year, where they were focusing their efforts and what was resonating and landing with customers. Facebook is another example of using where, so similar to Uber, where they were using schools as the where their customers were. And this is where your story and your strategy come together. When you're talking with an investor, if you look at some of the data on sort of how Facebook thought about their initial school strategies, they first started with Harvard, that's where they were. But after that, and they were looking at their next Ivy League schools to go after, they talk a lot about how they were looking at which schools had the largest overlap with friend groups with Harvard. Because when they launched a net new school, they wanted to launch to an already existing audience as big as that could be. So your go-to-market strategy and your version of capital efficient product market fit is all about talking about how are you sequencing your market? How are you taking your bigger market, breaking it down, and what's the sequence order that gives you a natural advantage? Whether a natural advantage for your product, a natural advantage for your team, or a natural advantage just in market conditions. And it's about having the dialogue with an investor on why you've sequenced the market out the way that you have is the important part of that narrative. Now, where your customers are isn't just geography or schools. It could mean the status quo. So in Airbnb's case, they first initially focused on where their customers were based on that they were on people who were posting their rooms on Craigslist. So they famously built a scraper for Craigslist, and this is how they got a lot of their first hosts, was by scraping Craigslist on sort of the status quo, the existing solutions people worked with. So where your customers are could either mean the status quo, physical geography, or it might mean the digital channels that you are going to reach those customers on. Again, it's all about how are we taking a larger market and what are we using to sequence that market out and prioritize where do we have a natural advantage and where will we naturally go faster. And then one of my favorites is looking at SpaceX. So SpaceX focused not on who the customers are, what problem that they're solving, where they are, but why are you trying to solve this problem? So their strategy unfolded with low Earth orbit first, geosynchronous transfer orbit, sun synchronous orbit. I know none of it, what this means, but if you go to Wikipedia, you can watch how 138 of their launches plays out on the strategy as they've unfolded. They've done 45 low Earth orbit launches, 35 geosynchronous, and I'm willing to bet that if you talk to somebody at SpaceX, they will tell you why low Earth orbit has 45 launches and why medium to high Earth orbit only has 13. Either there's not as many customers for the medium high Earth, or it could be that their solution just works better for low Earth orbit. It could be a mix of both. It could just be who they know, but there's probably a reason why it's dominoing like this. So we can watch companies' strategies unfold. We might not know the reasons behind it, but we can actually watch other company strategies unfold. When you're raising, it's all about explaining why does your strategy unfold this way and why do you have that natural advantage. So we've looked at how does this work for an enterprise sales play, a B2B SaaS, a consumer play, 2 marketplaces, and a deep tech moonshot play. So we can be pretty sure that this same concept will work for you as well. It's all about identifying what is that first thing that works. Who are those customers? What problem do they have? Where are they? Either the status quo that they're currently using, geography, or what channels are you finding them over? And why are they buying from you? Once you understand that, where are you going to go next? Because you want to make $1 million from the smallest market possible. Remember, Uber started with Uber Black in San Francisco, which was probably about a $40 million TAM. And then where are you going to go after that and why? This is the story that investors are interested in. Whether you show this in a deck or whether you just talk to investors, investors want to know that you understand your customers and understand your market. All we're talking about here is ideal customer profiles. And if you're an early stage company and you don't know yet, that's okay. What's your best hypothesis? And why is that your hypothesis? What kind of diligence have you done to validate that your hypothesis is probably right and you're raising money now to execute against that, or at least experiment against that? So find something that works. What would that look like? And then once that thing that you have that works, where would you go next and why? And then from there, how will that help you make huge leaps of faith towards going to something else and something different and then something different again, so you can fill in your larger vision. So this is how we go from the micro all the way up to the macro and tell a story of not just thematically what our big vision is, but systematically how we're going to get there and prioritize. And how do we show an investor that we actually understand this and we have unique insights and different points of view. Now that we understand sort of what the strategy looks like, how to build it for ourselves, it's still just a narrative. So what we want to understand is, what does product market fit actually define as? What is a measurable way to talk about product market fit so that we can reverse engineer our way back from and start building towards as we go through the motions? Because realistically, if the version of product market fit is you are ready to start scaling, you're probably not going to hit that until Series A or closer to Series B, depending on sort of how and when you raise your round. This is probably no unique insight to any of you, but VCs love conflicting advice. My favorite version of their conflicting advice is you need $1 billion market and you need to focus. And you've probably heard this in the same meeting from the same VC, and they knock you on both. Your market's too big, it's too noisy, there's too many competitors. You need to focus, but now that you're focused, you're going after something too small, you need a bigger vision. And that will happen all in the same half-hour meeting, and you're just going to walk away like someone just slapped you in the face and you don't really know what's going on. Worse, you probably do have a big vision, and I'm willing to bet that your product does in fact work for everyone. And this is the challenge we get ourselves into, is we have this huge vision, we're going to change the world, and our product works for everyone. And worse, probably when we released it, or when we released our wait list, or whenever we start talking about our product, we are getting signal from all sorts of people that they want our product. When Uber launched in San Francisco, almost every major city had people raising their hands like, when are you coming to my city? I'd like to use it. This looks amazing. You're going to get that kind of signal. When I was looking at sort of how to communicate product market fit and the concept to people, this quote really stood out to me. When Elon Musk was building the Model 3, they were struggling with their ramping up their production. And he went on and he had this quote, or at least this headline was, Elon Musk said, building a factory is 100 times as hard as building the car. Your product is your car. More specifically, your product is your car's ability to produce a happy customer. This is hard to build. Don't get me wrong, this is very difficult to find a product that can generate a happy customer. But that's not product market fit. That is problem solution fit. We can't scale that yet. Your factory is your ability to win $1 million worth of net new happy customers every single year. In a repeatable and scalable fashion, you need to be able to win $1 million worth of, and this should say new happy customers, because when you're pre-Series B, while expansion is interesting and important, you don't have a big enough customer base to rely on that to keep expanding off of. So you need new blood coming into your company each and every year to the tune of roughly $1 million a year worth of happy customers as the minimum building block for product market fit. Now, like I said, building the car, building your product and making a happy customers is hard. Building that factory that can produce $1 million worth of happy customers, which means you probably need more than $1 million worth of paying customers, because not every paying customer will be a happy customer, is 100 times as difficult. So here's where most startups go wrong. They get their product, they put it out into the wild, and they get signal. Everybody loves their product. They get a couple customers over here and a couple customers over there, and they get customers all across the board. And so that validates to themselves, my product works for everybody. Now, here's the trick. Because your product works for everybody and you have customers, everybody, you have nothing left to build. Your product's done. People are using it and they are in fact happy. So your resource constraint now is not on your product building capabilities. That will just create new shiny objects. You should be just fixing and improving your existing product. Your constraint is on your factory building resources, right? And so what do most startups do is they take their factory building resources and they try to build all of their factories at the same time. They try to build their factory in San Francisco and New York and Chicago and Paris and all of these cities at the exact same time. If with limited resources, Uber's tried to start by scaling 10 cities at the same time, they definitely would have stalled out and struggled, if not gone under. Here's where the most scalable companies do differently, is they launch their product and they get signal from everybody. But what do? They prioritize their factory building resources. They build one factory at a time. When you're pre-Series A, when you're pre-Series B, really, you only have resources for one and basically 1.5 factories. You have your main factory and you can start de-risking your other ones, but you don't have any more resources than that. It should consume most of your resources and you should start zoning in more and more and going deeper with that ideal customer profile. So what's the definition of a factory? My simple definition of what the factory is how do you find customers? How do you win those customers? How do you deliver value to those customers? And how do you retain those customers? Those are the 4 pieces of your factory: finding them, winning them, delivering value, and retaining them. And you want to be able to do that to the tune of $1 million a year of new happy customers every single year. Now that we know sort of what a factory looks like, we need to talk about how are we going to define repeatable. My simple definition of repeatable, so that we don't need crazy analytics to say, does it work, does it not work, is can you go through your entire factory and every single component of your factory to be able to say that it's a repeatable factory is you have to have done it more than 10 times ever in the lifetime of the factory. Anything less, and that one part is not quite repeatable yet. When you've done something once, it's not repeatable. When you've done something 3 times, you can maybe squint and say it's almost repeatable. At 10 times, it's starting, and that's my minimum viable definition of repeatable. Why I like this sort of concept of 1, 3, 10 is you can just ask yourself, have we done it more than 10 times? Yes or no? That's the simple answer. And if you've done it more than 10 times, you should be able to point to those case studies. So we don't need crazy analytics. It's after this point that we start adding in all the automations and analytics and all of that stuff, but we can keep our life relatively simple right now. We see this problem a lot with Series A based companies because you can actually get quite far along the way in what's called founder-led sales. The founder is a pretty good salesperson. They go out and hustle and they sell to the tune of $1 million, $3 million, sometimes even $5 million in revenue. Then they raise a boatload of money. And what happens? They've never built out a sales team. So the chink in their armor was that they had 1 sales team. That is not repeatable. They go and hire 10 salespeople right off the bat because they're told that that's what they do. And what happens is they can't transfer the founder's knowledge over into the sales team, and sales slow down. They fall off the venture scale path. They can't raise any more money. Worse, took them about 9 months to figure this out. They've burnt through most of their capital because revenue didn't come in. And even worse, when they built up their sales team, they also built up their engineering team, their marketing team, their customer success team. So they burnt through a crap ton of capital very, very fast because they scaled before their entire factory was repeatable. So this simple definition of 1, 3, 10 gives you your customized roadmap to product market fit. You have to go through each and every component of your factory and figure out which parts are less than 10. Now, I'm not saying that they all have to be greater than 10 on day 1, and I'm not even saying that they all have to be greater than 10 when you raise your Series A. All I'm saying is if you have anything that's less than 10, it should just be a warning signal that it's not quite repeatable yet. You can start scaling it up potentially, but monitor it very, very closely until you have confidence that yes, it is in fact repeatable. Let's watch this in play to when Uber actually started to scale meaningfully. So Chris Sacca released at one point the city expansion strategy for Uber. So you can see on the left at the bottom here, San Francisco is when they launched in 2010. Took them about a year to sort of get to $1 million in San Francisco. If we look at their factory, they had more than 10 drivers, more than 10 users, more than 10 rides. All of that went relatively fast. I bet you they had more than 10 users who did 10 rides. So all of that came relatively fast for them. But this green line here is when they hit 10 cities. Look what happens when after they hit 10 cities. They had one part of their blueprint that took a long time to get to 10. That was their city hopping strategy. It was the core to their ability to scale. The minute they hit 10, they basically went pure exponential. Why is that? The difference between their their San Francisco playbook and their New York playbook, my guess is that there was probably about 50% overlap between those 2 playbooks. The difference between their New York and their Seattle playbooks, probably 30% was different, 70% was the same. New York to Chicago, that number just keeps dropping and dropping. Roughly around 10 is when your playbooks don't change as much. You've just worked out the kinks. Imagine you've hired someone and you had to train them up. You've seen this time and time again in your own life, and you need to do this before you start spending a crap ton of money, right? Because once you start just throwing money into the system, that's when the bolts on your tires, if they are slightly loose, will start coming off on the highway because they will vibrate loose, and that's when you crash. And if you crash prematurely, what that means is you're probably not going to be able to raise your next round of financing, which means you go into bridge round territory, which is why on the Carta data, we're seeing so many people go into bridge rounds right now, or we got fancy names for them where we call them steed extensions and pre-A rounds and A prime rounds and all of these fun names, but it really just means that you've burnt 20 to 30% extra equity that you otherwise didn't want to burn because you missed something and you tried to scale too early or you didn't raise enough. So my question to you is, what does your factory look like, or what will it look like? This is your definition of my thing that works. It's how you find those customers, win them, deliver value, and retain them. Not just the tactics that are external, but are all your internal processes as well. What do they look like? And then where are you on that journey? What does your early signal show? Where are you more than 3? Where are you more than 10? Where are you less than 3? This will just help you figure out how you need to talk about your narrative and how you need to shore up any holes in your narrative before an investor finds them. And then the second part of it is, where is your signal actually coming from? So where your signal is coming from, does it actually match your growth story that you're talking about? Oftentimes founders will say, we've been super successful, we've been doing all these crazy things, but then you look at their go forward plan, and their go-forward plan is completely different than what they've done historically in the past. We want that to line up as much as possible so that it shows that we have done this before and now we're just doing it more often and going to keep getting better at it. So this is what lays the groundwork for everything that you're doing, whether you're raising capital, whether you're not raising capital. Hopefully by now you're starting to see is that I'm not advocating to raise capital. I don't think it's necessarily the only way. What you really need to know is for yourself, because you are your biggest investor, is you need to understand what's your go-to-market strategy, what does the find something that works looks like, how are you going to do it more often, and then how are you going to keep finding more things that work. Once you have that framework laid out, you need to start overlaying where do you have signal and where do you have gaps. This builds you your own customized blueprint to product market fit. One of the struggles with product market fit, in my opinion, is it's not standardized metrics. You can have 2 competitors in the same marketplace. They will pick a different segment of the market. They will have different tactics that they use. Therefore, they have different versions of product market fit. So that's why it's been so hard for people to have definitions. You need your own customized definition. This is also why seed and Series A investors have a hard time articulating what they need to see from a company in order to invest. Private equity is much easier, right? Because you're at scale. We just need to look at your financial model or your financials to see sort of how your business is working. But early stage, it gets into a lot more of this fuzzier stuff where your story and your signal have to line up and be able to, we need to be able to articulate it. Okay, the last 10 minutes here, and I'm happy to stay to answer some questions if you have, if we run a little bit over here, but I only have about 5 more slides left.
I'm so ready. Oh my God, Michael, that was phenomenal. I really appreciate it. It was, yeah, it was more than perfect. So to, kind of quickly summarize and make sure, if I at least understood the concept correctly, I guess it really tied in with what I usually advise my clients that, any startup has like the first and only job they have initially is to really figure out what problems they're solving, who are they solving it for, and what value do they offer to people that they want to pay for this, whether with their time or money. And then if you find that and really can focus it something that works, you're kind of in problem solution fit. And then the next step is you need to go to product market fit. And that means you can repeat this for a lot of people. So you have built a model that works. And then from there, I guess, I don't know, I kept thinking about fractal. Like what we were saying is like that first element of the building block is something that works. And then the question is, could you like a fractal expanded on its own? Like you start from an initial market, you limit it. We all have heard this advice that the most successful tech companies started from very, very narrow user base. Google started on academics, Amazon with books and such and such. Make it work, find the problem solution fit, find the product market fit, then start kind of expanding by find the next bucket that kind of, the hand wavy advice is 80% of that new user base fits your current line and 20% is different, and figure out the challenge and expand that way. And then I love also the way you kind of clearly define that, like that's until Series A. And then when you want to go to Series B, is like not the initial product anymore, expansion and scaling, because that's between Series A and B. And from B on, you really need to, again, bring back the focus on innovation. What else could you add? What new product you want to bring to market? However, if your initial formula and framework has been a real true fractal in that sense, so you really know in what market you are, who are your users, and you are just constantly adding more value. And like Uber example perfectly fits that. For different needs, whoever the user is, you just try to segment them and focus on their needs. Yeah, with that said, I really, really appreciate it. Do we have any questions?
Let me, if I can just sort of
please
pull it all together at the end here, and then we can kind of go into deeper questions if that makes sense. Or yeah, okay. So if you're gonna, I just wanted to sort of connect this into raising money. And so if you're gonna raise money, it all starts with this narrative. So as Sarah mentioned, it's first finding that one thing that works, and then that do it more often is really all about, I think Sarah uses the words fractal, but it's all about how you're not changing anything, or you're changing very little, which means we are now in execution mode and we can start actually scaling it, which means we're capital efficient. And that is the word du jour these days. And so that's what we really, really want to focus on. And then like Sarah said on the keep finding more things that work, that is now we're going into further innovation. Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Michael, for delivering such a great talk. And I have a couple of questions for you. So you're absolutely right that we see that that sometimes we're getting a conflicted advice. People say that, hey, your market size needs to be really large, right? And then in the same meeting, there might be discussions about the smaller market and the focus. In today's reality, what do you think should be the market size that the company starts at? Should it be less than $1 billion, maybe even smaller, and why? Would love to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So my view is that your big vision usually needs to be in and around that $10 billion mark, because that's kind of just seems to be a nice round number. No one's going to say it's too big. No one's going to say it's too small. But also in the same vein, no one's really going to believe it. So if I add up all of this here, that we're going to do all of these things, Uber Black, Uber Pool, Uber Eats, Uber X, Uber Pool, and Uber Eats. If I add all that together, that should be sort of in and around 10 billion or more. This first one, which is really just the expansion of where we're starting here, my recommendation, that's sort of in that order of 1 to 3, maybe up to $10 billion max. Anything bigger than that, people are going to go, your market, it's too big. You haven't really prioritized anything. Anything smaller, though, than $1 billion, and usually you're going to start getting red flags. I actually don't think it's bad to be a smaller than $1 billion. And in fact, I think this first segment that you're going to go after, if you look at any of the successful companies, is far less than $1 billion. But if you ever put that on a slide, you're just going to get a bunch of investors who just have an allergic reaction to it. So my Goldilocks zone is...
So to add to that, I'm sorry for cutting you off. I love to emphasize on that. There are a lot of successful businesses that their total addressable market are smaller than 1 billion. There is absolutely nothing wrong with them. The only thing is they are not VC fundable. Like VCs want to invest in big companies with big exits. Other than that, we have the majority of Europe's economy is based on these small family or lifestyle businesses. Go ahead, sorry.
No, so exactly. So, generally I just like to take a big giant vision. This is just an exercise of taking a huge giant vision and breaking it down to ever smaller parts, right? So, and it's a math problem. If this is 10 billion and that's $1 billion, then all of these have to add up to 9 billion. If this is $1 billion, that means, and this represents that, then if this is 100 million, then all of these have to add up to 900 million. It's just an exercise of taking a bigger problem and breaking it down into its component parts. And so that's why sort of this whole concept, when I work with a company to raise money, we always start with understanding this narrative, because this builds on everything that we're doing. How do we talk about our TAM? How do we talk about our SOM? How do we talk about our go-to-market strategy? What does our pricing model look like? Where's the signal? Everything starts with this. More importantly, even if at your pre-seed or seed stage, those investors, while you not have a lot of signal on this, they want to understand this story, because their downstream buyer is the Series A investor. And they want to know what their company is going to look like at Series A and whether you have enough resources to get your way to Series A. Series A investors, they actually want to see that you're starting to get proof. You are starting to see that this hypothesis you have is starting to take off, right? So they're going to do a little bit of checks on it. And then Series B investors just want to see that you actually have the first thing that's scaling and that you're just repeating the process over again. So while you're going to set this story, and as long as you don't pivot, it won't change as you go from pre-seed to seed to Series A to Series C. The only thing that's going to change is how much signal you have and where you have that signal, as long as you don't pivot, right? If you pivot, then obviously we have to go and rebuild this all over again. If you're looking to raise money, 3 things have to come together, right? The 3 things are process, your story, and the signal that you have. All 3 of these, for the stage that you're going after, all 3 of these have to work together. They're not separate things. They all have to work together. What we talked about today was 2 of those things. What's the story and what's your signal associated with that? What's your capital efficient growth story, AKA what does product market fit look like, so that it puts you on the venture scale path? And then how do you back that up with signal? Where are you 1, 3, 10? What does your factory look like? All of those component pieces together. The one part I didn't have time to cover today, which was the how to run a fundraising process. When we got this story right is when we started Ignacio's process to go out and raise his Series A, and he ultimately got 7 term sheets, and he ran his process really well. I also have a case study where a Series A got 4 term sheets, a seed got 2 term sheets, and then a pre-seed, I didn't work with this company, but a pre-seed company got 3 term sheets. When I was out fundraising, people always told me you needed to run a process, but no one actually ever showed me what that looks like. They never showed me what the funnel numbers look like. How do you actually run the process? What does the mechanics of this look like? What an interesting thing is if you look at each of these companies, the Series A, the seeds, and the pre-seeds, they all ran the exact same process. You cannot get their funnel numbers, and they're all exactly the same. Because I didn't have enough time to talk about them today, I'm running a free training next week. Happy to have you guys join. It's free again, but I just want to make sure people can see what it takes to actually run. If you're going to go down the venture path, this is probably the most important thing you need to do, along with the product market fit, is you need to run a proper process so that you have the ability to negotiate with VCs in a proper way. If you're not going to go down the venture scale process, then today's talk is everything you need. It's product market fit. It's your story and your signal, and it's all that you need to build your business and become a better operator.
Absolutely amazing. And thank you for sharing this. I want to make a couple of announcements before people have to drop, and we really had a captive audience so far, is that we created this LinkedIn group for our early stage investment, and then I'm going to share the link to all the participants. Please feel free to join. We want to have a community created and share. Some people, keep sending me stuff that they really like, and they would like to share it with the community. And I would also share the registration link again. So please do feel free to share it with your friends and groups of Xoogler and Xooglers if they're interested. And then I am going to start sending a feedback form after the meetings. So please do fill that out. It's going to take you a couple minutes, but hopefully it's going to really tremendously help us to make these sessions much better and productive. And also, again, Alex suggested Michael, and then I'm so happy I met him, and he gave us this phenomenal talk. So if there's anybody you guys are following or you would like to hear them speak, please do reach out. Let me know. I'm more than happy to just put myself online and reach out. And then hopefully we are going to also plan to have these meetings in other time zones. So if if it's really inconvenient for people, hopefully we can accommodate that way for the time. Like we're not a European time friendly, for example, and then I still have my, presence and home in Berlin. So I really care about being able to engage European community. With all that said, please do give us feedback. We are going to just make, my intention is to just make this worthwhile of your time. And again, Michael, thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough. And I am going to try to participate in this next session you have. And then if we have enough interest, maybe if I'm not stepping too much over, maybe I'll invite you to give that talk to us as well. And then hopefully you can also support the Xoogler community founders who are going to raise funds in next stages.
Awesome. It was a pleasure to be here. Reach out on LinkedIn if you have any other questions.
Yes, and I have shared Michael's LinkedIn link. I will do it again. So thank you, everybody. Michael, we really enjoyed, and talking to you guys next week. And we have Peter Walker next week as the speaker, and I'm going to share the link again. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.